start with some kirtan, and then we will begin our topic, chapter 11 of Teachings for Chaitanya. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Vishnu Padaya Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisheshashunyavadi Vaskasyadarshakarini Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisheshashunyavadi Vaskasyadarshakarini Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivakadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivakadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Shri Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Gaura Hari Bol. So again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening and for giving me the opportunity to speak on this very special book, The Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which is a book by Srila Prabhupada based on Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is the biography of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we'll begin with our prayers. Om Jnanatimirandasya Ginanjana Shalakaya Chakshuramritam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Bhagadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastrati Deshtarini. So the invocation prayer is verse 18 of the first chapter of the Adi Leela of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. The translation of this verse is: Glory to Sri Chaitanya and Nityananda. Glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Sri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So today, to recap, we are going to discuss chapter 11, the continuation of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings to Sanatana Goswami. And this began in chapter 3 of this book, where Sanatana Goswami had approached Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on behalf of all the conditioned souls with the most basic of inquiries into spiritual life, which we should all begin with, which is: who am I? Why am I suffering? How can I get out of this suffering? So this chapter 11 is entitled Service to the Lord. I initially thought that we could cover it in one session, but there's so many wonderful points that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is making that will actually cover this chapter in two parts. The first part this week, and we'll continue next week. And I pray for all your blessings in order to do justice to this wonderful chapter. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is beginning by saying to Sanatana Goswami, the process by which we can approach Krishna. The only process, said Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is devotional service to Krishna. This is the verdict of all Vedic literature. As the sages declare, if someone inquires into the Vedas to determine the process of transcendental realization, or if someone consults the Puranas, which are considered sister literatures, one will find that in all of them, the conclusion is that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the only object of worship. So this is a very important point to begin with. This is also something that we've discussed in previous chapters, that those people who consider themselves Vedantas, or who are trying to study Vedanta or aligning themselves with Vedic philosophy, but who have been somewhat misled into believing that the Vedic conclusions establish God as impersonal. They outright reject the Puranic conclusions, specifically the conclusions of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which states that Krishna is the supreme. So the way that they most often do this is by saying that the Puranic literatures are not, as Srila Prabhupada states here, sister literatures of the Vedas. Sometimes they may be quite derisive the Puranas are simple stories for those who can't understand the Vedic philosophy in its entirety. The unfortunate part is that people who come to such conclusions, they're becoming more and more popular in this age of Kali, because Kali is pretty much the time where Maya's illusory powers can come to the fore. People don't have the good qualities like they had in previous ages. Basically, the people in previous ages were more or less situated in the mode of goodness, and so they were more easy to come out of the illusion that defines the conditioned soul. Prabhupada often states that there are four defects of the conditioned soul, and one of them is to be an illusion. But when one is situated in godly qualities, particularly in the first stages of Satya Yuga and Treta Yuga, but also to a large degree in Dwapara Yuga, when one is situated in godly qualities, it's more easy for one to overcome its tendency to illusion and to approach spiritual life with the right spirit. And so, even though the Vedic literatures and the Vedic conclusions may not have always been so clear, even to the sages in previous ages, but eventually they come to that conclusion of devotional service to perfect their lives. We see that in many histories. But in this age of Kali Yuga, where the living entities are so full of negative qualities, the Srimad Bhagavatam lists them quite extensively. It's very hard for them to overcome that tendency to illusion. And so everybody basically has an opinion on the Vedas, whether or not they're qualified or not. And most often these are the wrong conclusions, particularly personal conclusions. This is an unfortunate position we're in. So we don't have to look very far if we want to understand how deeply in illusion people are. Very often there's enough examples around us in the news, something we hear, something we see, that makes us wonder, why would somebody do things? Like people would engage in activities that are either quite surprising, quite foolish, quite ghastly, whether it's your politician, your neighbor, some movie star, or even the ordinary person. Sometimes people just do things that make us wonder why. And this is how dense the illusion is in this age. If people can't even run their lives free of illusion, then how are they going to be able to understand something as complex as a Vedic literature and have a recognizable opinion on this? So if we sit and we think about it, it's not as simple as just trying to read it and get some kind of understanding like we would in a material sense. If anyone's trying to approach the Vedic literatures that way, it pretty much explains why they would get to the wrong conclusions. In modern academic senses, we can sit with books and try and read them and get some kind of sufficient understanding to apply the knowledge. And the Vedic literature does contain what would be considered some material topics, because the Vedic literatures are containing all the knowledge in all of creation. So there's discussions on, there are topics like astronomy and military science and medical science, for example. But it's not that the Vedic literatures are containing these topics for any kind of material goal only in the end. The aim of everything in the Vedas is devotional service. Krishna, who is the writer of the Vedas, the goal of the Vedas, who is revered by the personified Vedas, who is the knower of the Vedas. Krishna says that he is the ultimate aim. How to reach him is the ultimate aim. So all these topics that are there are adjuncts to devotional service. If one takes medical science, for example, the medical science will teach one how to overcome disease so that one can engage in devotional service more effectively. If there's military science in the Vedas, it's so that one can defend oneself against whichever enemy may be attacking, and then one can peacefully engage in devotional service. Basically, looking at the Vedas in its proper perspective and with the right authority will always lead one to devotional service. But it is, again, difficult if one is approaching it in a purely materialistic fashion, which is what most people are doing in this age. So they're definitely not coming to the right conclusions. And of course, we understand that Bhakti Yoga is not it's not a mundane, she's not a mundane topic that can just be understood by reading. She's a person, and she doesn't have to be revealed to just anyone who picks up any kind of Vedic literature and tries to read it. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, which is the summary of the Vedas, that the science may not be explained to one who is not austere, not devoted, not engaged in devotional service, not to one who is envious of Krishna. That's pretty much describing about 99% of everyone who's reading the Vedas these days and trying to pull out a conclusion from it. So how are they going to get to the conclusion? Especially because to Krishna, it's not like he's sitting there trying to get likes out of everybody who is reading Vedas. Spiritual life is not a popularity contest. He's not interested in gathering as many followers as possible. We know that he's the most renounced personality. He's demonstrated this repeatedly as his original self when he would leave the gopis, the most qualified of his followers, pure devotees, and possessing all kinds of opulences, their pure beauty, their love for him, their complete dedication. He walked away from them repeatedly during the Rasa dance, when he left Vrindavan, and at other times in his other incarnations, as King Rishabhadev, his perfect kingdom, his wonderful family, advisors, and so on. He renounced it all. As Lord Ramchandra, when he fought Raman so much to get Mother Sita back, such a highly qualified wife, but for the sake of the example of Dharma that he was here to teach, he renounced her as well. And then, of course, as Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who became a sannyasi at the young age of 24, and left behind the most qualified wife and mother and all the wonderful followers of his in Navadvip, who are no less than the inhabitants of Vrindavan, in order to take to the life of sannyas. So basically, the Lord, in all respects, is the most renounced person because he's Atmaram, completely satisfied in himself. He doesn't need anything from anyone, certainly not that we all immediately take to his worship um, after after trying to understand Vedas. It's not like he's sitting over there hoping that this is what we're going to do for the sake of wanting followers. Krishna wants us to come to these conclusions for our own sakes, for our liberation, for us to be freed of suffering out of his great love for us. And this is the reason why he makes all this knowledge available to us, because he cares about us. It's not that he requires that worship from us, that he's dependent on it in any way. So the real Vedic conclusions, therefore, will be available to the one who is taking to devotional service, because the devotional service is powerful enough to strip away this incredibly dense illusion that everybody is so completely stuck in. So, in this regard, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had come to give us this process in the easiest way possible out of his causeless mercy, demonstrating his causeless mercy to us. And so he himself was not engaged strictly in the study of the Vedanta, at least to the outside observer, and he was chanting and dancing in ecstasy. So he was questioned by one of the greatest Mayavadis of his time, Prakashananda Saraswati. Why are you not engaged in the study of Vedanta? Vedanta, of course, being the commentary on the Vedas. Why are you not basically, then he's questioning, why are you not trying to understand the Vedas? Rather, why are you acting like a sentimentalist and basically engaging in devotional service? And now Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in his humility, and was taking the role of the ordinary living entity, said to Prakashananda Saraswati that my spiritual master considered me a fool, and so he did not engage me in study. Rather, he told me that you just chant the names of Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is no fool, but we all are, and this is the reason why we've gotten ourselves to this point in Kali Yuga. all of us who are present here right now, all 6 billion of us, have some heavy karma to pay, which is why we're living in these times, which are so completely degraded, and so many terrible things are happening throughout the world, and we're subjected to so much misfortune. Like we were saying before, the Srimad Bhagavatam lists them out quite extensively. From our short lives, we don't know what's going to happen in the next minute. No one is guaranteed, even to living to 80, but to speak of 100 like this. That was predicted for this age. When we have so many bad associations, it's hardly anyone that we can actually trust, even sometimes amongst our family members. When our leaders are so corrupt, we can't trust them to be guiding us. When we are so unfortunate, so many bad things always happening without warning. When we're so disturbed by all the things that are going on, we're so quarrelsome, and we just can't accept anything, even if it's for our own good, without questioning it and so on. So, with all of this against us, we have to understand that we can't just take the opportunity of trying to understand the Vedic literature without some great help from the Supreme Lord. It's just not possible. And the Lord is always there to grant us that kind of help, which is why He gives us the conclusion of the Vedic literatures. The summary of the Vedic literatures, which is the Bhagavad Gita. He gives us the conclusion of the Vedic literature, which is the Srimad Bhagavatam, and He gives us the highest process of devotional service, the Maha Mantra, in which we can so easily, with these short lives and all these other problems, attain to that highest goal of freedom of this material world. So all of this is given to us out of His extraordinary compassion, because as much as the Lord is renounced, He's also extraordinarily compassionate to the living entities. I'd say He's more compassionate than even His renounce, because He's always making His efforts for us continuously to try and get us out of the suffering. He doesn't enjoy seeing us in this kind of illusion that keeps us trapped in this horrible material world, especially at this particular bad point in time, in this Kali Yuga. So, thinking of all these factors against us, He's made everything so simple for us, actually. But the funny thing is, the tendency of people is to question even if He does this. It's like if we walked into a half price sale and something that we wanted for a very long time suddenly available at such a reduced rate, or we really need to get away from work and our boss is having a good day and he decides to give us the day off just when we need it, or we want to win something in a competition, we actually get a bigger prize than what is expected. Can you imagine when anything good like this would happen to us? We sit and we question it. We don't believe that it's actually real. We decide that we're going to stay at work because, why would the boss give us a day off? We don't take that holiday or that prize because we think it's too good to be true. We don't buy that item. We just decide we'll wait some other point. That's complete foolishness, but that's what's really happening right now. People are not taking the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the holy name, seriously. They're deciding that they're just going to do their own thing and try to approach the Vedas, try to approach spiritual life, try to get out of the material world their own way. And every time the Lord is throwing some kind of extraordinary mercy their way, they're just deciding that it's not good enough or too good to be true or not Vedic enough or whatever other excuse. And they're losing the opportunities to get free of the material suffering. It's actually a little bit mind-boggling if we think about it. So this is the unfortunate position that we're in. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is trying to enlighten us out of it. So he continues. Krishna is the absolute truth, the supreme personality of Godhead, and he is situated in his internal potency, which is known as Swarup Shakti or Atma Shakti, as described in the Bhagavad Gita. He expands himself in multiple forms, some of which are known as his personal forms, and some as his separated forms. Thus, he enjoys himself in all the spiritual planets, as well as in the material universes. So this is a summary of what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Achintya Bheda Tattva, basically. Because The Lord has two types of forms of himself. So the first type, the integrated forms, are his actual incarnations and expansions, who all come from him, but who share his qualities in form. Therefore, they can act as him, and that's why they are considered the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the separated forms of the Lord are us, the living entities. So it doesn't actually mean we are forms of his like his incarnations, but because we share the same qualities as his incarnations, same qualities of eternality, knowledge, and bliss. And because we also have our origin in him, so we're considered forms of his, but separated, eternally separated, because we don't have the capability to utilize his qualities in full like he or his incarnations can. We can only act in very minute capacities. So we never have that distinction of being considered supreme or being considered the same as him. And this is why, of course, the Mayavad tendency, when we were reading Vedic literatures or any other, trying to understand any kind of philosophy, trying to see ourselves as one that never stands up philosophically, because we can never be equal to the Supreme Lord. We are always eternally separated. So this division now of separated parts, we have, like we said, the integrated parts, the incarnations and expansions of the Lord, and separated parts, which are the living entities. That division of separated parts is further divided into those who are eternally liberated and those who are eternally conditioned. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is explaining this further to Sanatana Goswami as well. Krishna separated expanded forms of the living entities who are classified according to which of the Lord's energies they are under. So that means if they are under the spiritual energy or the internal potency, Srimati Radharani, then they are always existing in the spiritual world, engaged fully in Krishna's service. And if those separated forms come under the material energy or the external energy or Maya, then they're living in the material world, and then they're unfortunately trying to engage in the service of themselves, which leads to untold misery. On account of the conditioned soul's eternal attitude of separation from Krishna, the spell of the material energy awards them two kinds of bodies: the gross body, consisting of 5 elements, and the subtle body, consisting of mind, intelligence, and ego. Being covered by these two bodies, the conditioned soul eternally suffers the pangs of material existence, known as the threefold miseries. So it says, diseased and conditions, living entities transmigrating all over the universe. Sometimes he is situated in the upper planetary system, and sometimes he travels in the lower planetary system. In this way, he leads his diseased conditioned life, which can only be cured when he meets and follows the expert physician, the bona fide spiritual master. So we know that all traditions, even in material life, require a teacher. But the difference in spiritual life or in Krishna consciousness is that the role of the teacher is never exhausted. In material life, once you have attained all the knowledge you need to from your teacher, then you go on to maybe be a teacher yourself, utilize the knowledge, and you don't keep consulting with your teacher or keep serving under your teacher. The relationship is in effect over, although you may retain some respect for that person. But in Krishna consciousness, it is very different. In the words of Narottam Das Thakur, Janme Janme Prabhu, birth after birth, the spiritual master is your master. Your spiritual master is your teacher, is your guide. Because the spiritual master is the one who gives you to Krishna, or who gives Krishna to you. We actually experience the love of Krishna in a greater way than we may experience it on our own through the spiritual master. An example that we have sometimes is that Manjaris, those who are serving Srimati Radharani, they don't actually serve Krishna directly. But because they're serving Srimati Radharani, then they're experiencing the love of Krishna through her, and they're actually experiencing Krishna's love in a greater way than if they were experiencing that love directly. And so our relationship with the spiritual master is very sacred, something that is carrying us to Krishna in a much more accelerated way than if we were approaching Krishna directly, also in a much more relishable way. And this is the extraordinary good fortune that we have when we come in contact with the spiritual master. And it's not something that happens to everybody. It's extremely rare event, something that must be treasured. A conditioned living entity should become aware of his real position and pray to the Lord, how much longer will I be ruled by all these bodily functions, such as lust and anger? As masters of the conditioned soul, lust and anger are never merciful. Indeed, such bad masters never cease demanding service from the conditioned soul. So this is a very unfortunate position of the living entity in this material world. Everyone thinks that their desires are serving them. So these lustful desires become the focus of their lives. They're always trying to fulfill them. And if those desires are thwarted in some way, then usually the result is that people get angry. And so we're constantly in this loop of lust and anger, and we think that these are helping us, but these are actually trapping us more and more in this material world. Because the more desires we have, the more we have to come back to fulfill those desires. And yet the nature of the material world is that desires are almost never possible to be fulfilled to the degree that we want. So we're always in some kind of frustration or full-on anger. Therefore, these are the worst masters that any living entity can possibly take shelter of. And only by trying to get free of this lust and anger, taking shelter of Krishna, the ultimate, most benevolent, most compassionate master, this is the way that we can get out of the suffering. But when he comes to his real consciousness, Krishna consciousness, he stops serving these bad masters and approaches Krishna with a frank and open heart to achieve his shelter. At such a time, he prays to Krishna to be engaged in his transcendental love service. And this is what the Maha Mantra is. It is a prayer for devotional service because it is devotional service, which is there at the beginning, there in the middle, and it is the goal, the conclusion. It's there at the end. It takes us out of this material world into the spiritual world and keeps us there in the spiritual world, in that realm of bliss and away from this material world. Lord Chaitanya says that the Vedic literatures may talk about fruitive activities, mystic yoga, and the speculative search for knowledge as different ways to self-realization. But these paths are indirect because none of them can actually get us to real self-realization. So basically, these paths are there to help those who may be inclined to them. But unless one actually gets to devotional service, one really can't understand what one's position actually is. So for those who consider that the paths of fruitive action, which is you work hard, you take the results of your activities, you engage in some kind of charity or some kind of yagya to purify yourself from sin. So what we call mental speculation, trying to understand Vedic teachings or spiritual life in an academic way and trying to apply those teachings in order to attain self-realization, or mystic yoga, where one is engaged in yogic practices, whichever of them one is being taught in order to attain some kind of perfection, ultimately often to merge into the Brahman. Whatever path one may take, one has to understand that none of these paths is actually supreme, just by nature of being temporary. So what does that mean? If we look at it, there isn't actually a eternal spiritual planet where anybody is engaged in material speculation, in fruitive activities, or in mystic yoga. It means that these processes are not actually meant to be permanent. In fact, even the practitioners themselves will understand that none of these processes brings them any kind of bliss that they would be wanting to do it forever. These processes are means to an end. What that end actually is, many of them are not aware of. They mistakenly think that it is to attain some material goal. So either attaining the heavenly planets, mostly in the case of fruitive action, or to attain powers from the case of mystic yoga. And mystic yoga itself also leads people to wanting to become one with the Brahman. And that we know is also the aim mostly of mental speculation. There's always some other kind of end that is driving people. It's not that they ever expect to be involved in all these processes forever. So we can understand that there isn't any real supremacy in the process, that you can't or you don't actually want to always be engaged in. But devotional service is so different. Devotional service is by nature so relishable that one starts with it, but one is able to not just continue with it, but devotional service is also the goal at the end. This is what the entire spiritual world is engaged in service to Krishna. This is the supremacy of the path that you don't actually want to leave, that you don't want to have an end to, that can actually be the goal in itself, even while being the process of it. That's the extraordinary feature. And most importantly, out of all, devotional service is completely independent to any of these other processes. It's not that if one is engaged in spiritual activity or mystic yoga or mental speculation, that one can actually get to devotional service. Devotional service is described as causeless. Causeless means that you can't get it by doing anything else. It's bestowed by the mercy of Krishna or the mercy of his devotees. And that's the rareness of devotional service, as Goswami calls it. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is saying again that spiritual activity, mystic meditation, and philosophical speculation are not direct methods of self-realization. Because even after somebody has reached the conclusion that, okay, there's something missing, that these paths are not actually leading to a goal that is permanent, something that's going to make me happy forever, they still have to depend on the causeless mercy of the Lord or his devotee to reveal themselves and bestow devotional service. That's the only time that they can get to this permanent method of getting out of this material world, this permanent liberation. So, in this way, we realize that when we get this opportunity of devotional service, it's not something that can be taken lightly, like Prabhashananda Saraswati would say to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's not a matter of sentiment. It's actually the rarest opportunity that one can get to get out of this material world for good, and that there are living entities that will be going on and on in these other processes, spiritual activity and so on, for billions of lifetimes, and never actually, no matter how qualified they get in any of these processes, never have an opportunity to even come to devotional service without this causeless mercy that's just suddenly bestowed. So we've read often of the analogy of the tortoise that's a turtle, sorry, that's swimming in the ocean, a vast, vast ocean. And what are the chances that this turtle will come across a piece of wood, and a piece of wood that will have a hole that is exactly the size of the head of this turtle? And that with all the bobbing up and down of the waves, this turtle will be able to get its head into that hole perfectly. That's our chances of coming to devotional service. This is, again, our great good fortune that we can never turn down, that we must always try to make the best of. When Vyasadeva was not satisfied, even after compiling heaps of books of Vedic knowledge, Narada Muni, spiritual master, explained that no path of self-realization can be successful unless it is mixed with devotional service. So we know this history from the Srimad Bhagavatam, that Vyasadeva was apparently bewildered, of course, taking on a role as well. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appeared to write down Vedic literature for generations to come. And he's describing all these paths, the fruitive activity, the mental speculation, and the mystic yoga, and so on, as paths to self-realization. But he was so dissatisfied with these conclusions that his spiritual master Narada had to come and enlighten that without devotional service, you're actually not guiding anybody to real self-realization. And this is when Srila Vyasadeva wrote the Srimad Bhagavatam, the real guide to self-realization, which is devotional service. Similarly, Shukadeva Goswami prays in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 4, Text 17. There are many sages who are expert in performing austerities. There are many men who give much in charity. There are many famous men, scholars, and thinkers, and there are those who are very expert in reciting their thoughts. Although all the activities of these men are auspicious, unless one performs them in order to attain devotional service to the Lord, they cannot award desired results. This is very clear. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Lord, the only one who can award such results. So that's causeless mercy. People can do whatever they want, engage in any amount of fruitive activities, engage in any amount of mental speculation, study, Vedic study, mystic yoga, as much as they want to, as long as they want to. But there is no guarantee that they will get to the ultimate liberation. they may get to the liberation of being freed of material desires. This is one aspect of liberation. But unless one replaces that activity that one has given up, so one replaces that lack of material desires with spiritual activity, one is not guaranteed a strong and steady position in spiritual life. There's always the opportunity to fall down. This will come to in later verses today. And because of this, it's a very unstable position, and it's not something that is actually coveted. It's actually something that Lord Brahma says is rather troublesome. This stable position of devotional service, that's only granted by causeless mercy by the Supreme Lord, as Sripade Goswami is stating here. It reminds us of a little joke when we were younger, and we would want something from our parents, but they would say, you can do whatever you want and stand on your head. It doesn't mean that you're going to get it. And sometimes this is what is happening with philosophers. They're doing whatever they want. They're even, if they're engaged in Sikh yoga, they're even posturing to the point of standing on their heads or doing all kinds of things. But that doesn't mean that they're going to get the causes to engage in devotional service. Although many types of philosophers and transcendentalists believe that one who lacks knowledge cannot be liberated from material entanglement, there is no possibility that knowledge without devotional service can involve liberation. In other words, when jnana, or the cultivation of knowledge, leads one to the path of devotional service, then only does it help one gain liberation, but not otherwise. So this is trying to say that in contrast to what is conventionally accepted, that when one studies or gains knowledge, then one makes advance in spiritual life, it's actually the opposite. If one is just engaged in regular knowledge to try to approach spiritual life without devotional service, that knowledge has no guarantee of getting one to devotional service. But if one has gotten the causeless mercy of Krishna, the spiritual master, to attain knowledge that will get us to devotional service, that is actually what guarantees us the real liberation. So in the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that material nature is so strong that it can only be surmounted by those living entities who surrender to the lotus feet of Krishna. Only they can cross the ocean of material existence. When a living entity forgets that he is eternally the servant of Krishna, that forgetfulness causes his bondage in conditioned life, and his attraction to the material energy. Indeed, that attraction is the shackle of the material energy. Since it's very difficult for a person to become free as long as he desires to lord it over the material nature, it is recommended that he approach a spiritual master who can train him in devotional service. In this way, he can get out of the clutches of the material nature and take the speak of Krishna. So again, this point keeps coming up, that without the mercy of the spiritual master or the pure devotee, without this causeless mercy, one can't get out of the material life. We can look around us, especially at this time. It's one thing being in Kali Yuga, it's one thing being this point in history in Kali Yuga, it's one thing being here during this month of the year in Kali Yuga, when everybody is just so absorbed in sense gratification. It's like the month of December is sense gratification completely from start to finish, because everybody's just focused on how much they're going to enjoy. It's actually crazy that there's one point of determination, as we would call it, but there's one point of determination to having everything anyone wants: holidays, and eating and drinking, and being merry, and dancing, and shopping, and being seen, and seeing and being seen, and so on. So in such a state of mind, even though the Bhagavad Gita is available, Srimad is available, the holy name is available, how many people are going to be able to walk away from all that sense gratification and take these objects of mercy seriously? It's only through the personality of the pure devotees who reach out to them, to reach the spiritual master who reaches out to them, those that are serious about their devotional service and who are repositories of the Lord's mercy, that can actually penetrate the consciousness of people who are so deep into sense enjoyment. We see how Srila Prabhupada did it, how all these spiritual sons and daughters did it, how everybody who is following their footsteps are able to do it. This is because that causeless mercy, that's the only force that's stronger than this mad pursuit of sense gratification. It's the purity of purpose that anybody who is engaged in teaching has, or apt up this wonderful, extraordinary cause. Lord Chaitanya then goes on to explain that whatever the division of society that one may be in terms of social or spiritual standings, that means whether one is engaged in the brahmachari or student life, the grihastha household life, vanaprastha or retired life, or sannyasi or renounced life, or whether they are intellectuals, brahmins, administrators, kshatriyas, merchants or business people, the vaishyas or laborers, shudras, whatever state of life one may be in, one still needs to be engaged in devotional service. Somebody may make the argument that this prescribed duties have been laid down in Vedas, have been given by Krishna himself. I just engage in my prescribed duties and I don't necessarily take to devotional service, and surely it will get me some kind of auspicious end. But the Lord is saying that we don't know how much of sinful activities we're actually incurring when we're engaging in these activities. Unless we're engaged in devotional service, these activities could take us to hell, and we have no way of saving ourselves. So it's not enough to just simply say that being engaged in our prescribed duties, whatever ashram or whatever varna we're in, is enough. And then Lord Chaitanya takes us back to warn us again about this point of Mayavadi philosophy, this pitfall in considering ourselves the same as the Supreme Lord, that it's just unnecessary trouble and we should be careful to guard ourselves against it. So he quotes a very famous verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 2, Text 32. Yenye arvindaksha vimuktamaninas bhavat avishuddha buddhaya aruhya krishena parampadam tataha vidanti ado nadita yushmad antrayaha. Those who think that they are liberated according to Mayavad philosophy, but who do not take to the devotional service of the Lord fall down for want of devotional service, even after they undergo the severest types of penances and austerity, and even after they sometimes approach the Supreme Krishna. This is so sad that after so much of renunciation, so much of study, so much austerity, because the path of trying to elevate oneself through Mayavad philosophy, Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, it's difficult. One still has to undergo austerities. They still have to give up sense gratification. They have to do so much. They come so close that they may become situated after death in the Brahman effulgence, right there at Krishna's effulgence. But because their soul is not satisfied with the lack of activity and they have qualified themselves for spiritual activity, they can't stay there, nor they can penetrate that effulgence into the spiritual world. So the only option is to fall down again, to fall back down into this material world. So it's really not worth it. It's not worth it to subscribe to this philosophy of all is one for the simplicity of it, try to attain it. Because one wants to enjoy like the Supreme Lord basically after death. One thinks that it's so easy to just become one with God and enjoy everything that he has. The most important thing for us to do is to take this very, very, very rare opportunity of devotional service and not squander this priceless chance that we have to execute it under the guidance of the Lord and his dear devotees who show us so much causeless mercy, and purify ourselves of all the sufferings of this material world so that we can Krishna at the end. So thank you all so much for your kind attention, and we're going to continue the rest of our discussion on this chapter 11 this week. So let's join us then. Shri Shantai Gaurari Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Are there any questions? Any comments? Or
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Welcome back, and thank you for all the effort you put in with all the long messages you sent while you were away. It's really inspiring.
Thank you, bro.
Mataji, I was reading Nature of Devotion this afternoon, and exactly what you were speaking about now, the fruit of workers and the knowledge seekers and that. And I was under the impression that these are sort of long processes to get to the same goal as what you would from bhakti. But it's pretty clear from this teaching that that's not true, or that's not the case. Is that correct?
So yeah, you're actually right. So that is something that we've sort of what can I say? We sort of drawn that conclusion over time. But basically, what these other processes can do is can lead the very sincere follower of those processes to understand that something is missing. That no matter how much I pursue mystic yoga, no matter how much I pursue mental speculation, no matter how much I pursue sacrificing the results of my work, I'm not actually going to get to some permanent goal. So that that understanding that I'm going to fall short, and this is not actually what the soul should eternally aim for, that would create a longing in that soul to want that something. But actually coming to that point of devotional service, that's actually a little bit different. That's depending on causeless mercy. So that means that even if we come to the point of realizing even that Krishna is supreme through those other processes, which is possible, but the actual taking to devotional service, that's not guaranteed even at that point. Is that more clear?
Yes, no, that clears it up. Thank you very much, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Because there's a lot of people who may actually admit to us that they know that Krishna is supreme, that he's God. They may come to that conclusion on their own, that no one's actually preached to them, but they've just been reading enough and things like that. But they're not actually engaged in any active devotional service. That conclusion still doesn't necessarily get them to that point.
Okay, no, thank you. That's clear.
Any other questions?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for the wonderful classes. Really appreciate your time and dedication. Yeah, Maharaj, I want to ask you, could you tell us a bit about your trip to India, and what is the best part of your trip that inspired you the most?
So,
thank you,
our
Maharaj.
yatra was basically the same. It was the extension of causeless mercy. If we think that that going to transcendental places is as simple as buying tickets and going there and then just having the transcendental experience, then it's pretty much the same as somebody thinking they could pick up a piece of Vedic literature and just understand its conclusions. It's all mercy dependent. It's all whether the Lord wants to reveal himself in those places or not. So it's entirely possible that somebody could buy a ticket and go to the holy places and be there just as a tourist and then come back with a tourist experience. And if they do that, then they'd be a little bit disappointed, because to the external eyes, the holy places are not as mystical as one may be expecting. They could be, according to the sincerity of the person. But again, to the external eyes, in a conventional sense, it's not always like that. So it is very, very mercy dependent. So this is something that we pray to our spiritual masters for their mercy to give us the permission to enter and to see things, to see the holy places through the eyes of the spiritual master. And how we do that is by hearing. So when we go to these holy places, and when we went, it was our good fortune that we would hear from the spiritual master. And so each place was approached in that way, that we would go and have a class, have kirtan, and so we would actually get into the mood and the mercy of that particular whole place because of hearing. This is the essential part of going on yatra. So it's having spiritual discussions and of course engaging in kirtan. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu set that example, because wherever he went, he would engage in Sankirtan and invite all kinds of living entities, not just people, but also the animals, were chanting the holy names. And that's and the fact that the holy names can also deliver inanimate creatures like trees and such. That's also very important because what would their spiritual destinies be like standing for thousands of years and not getting the opportunity to liberate it? So by engaging in Sankirtan, they're also benefiting. So we're not just going to these holy places and just taking, we're also giving in that way with Sankirtan. So this was a special feature of traveling under the guidance of senior devotees, of spiritual masters like that. So there's so many amazing experiences that we had, but there were a few specific highlights. I would say we had one experience that was well, we had so many wonderful experiences, but we had one that kind of showed that even the Lord enjoys or relishes this hearing and chanting so much. So we were at we went to Mayapur Dam again by the mercy of Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga, and we were trying to have darshan of all the 9 islands of Navadvip Dam. So when we got to the second island, it was a little close to Chisamantadvip from the position that we were at. It was a little close to the end of the darshan time. It was what I mean is it was almost 1 o'clock. So devotee who was guiding us was telling us to hurry up a little bit, very politely, but telling us to hurry up a little bit so that we could have darshan with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srimati Devi. So this is it's a very beautiful temple, which is under the care of ISKCON in Samantadweep. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is basically giving Samantani Devi his darshan. Samantani Devi is Parvati, the wife of Lord Shiva, and she came to Navadvip to get Lord Chaitanya's mercy. So we had that lovely darshan, and then we sat down in front of their forms in order to discuss some Krishna Katha. Prabhu was speaking, and he was giving us the opportunity to speak as well. And so we were so absorbed in the discussions that we didn't notice that it was going past 1 o'clock, that it was now 10 past 1, quarter past 1, 20 past 1, half past 1. And somehow the darshan was so open. The Lord had not gone to rest. And finally, at some point, the pujari came and realized that the darshan was still open. And so he laughed and told us that this was probably because the Lord had been enjoying the discussions that we were having so much that for the first time in so many years, the darshan stayed open for such a long time after 1 o'clock. It's something that's practically unheard of. So he gave us some prasada from their lordships, tulsi and flowers, and gave us his blessings, and then the darshan closed. So this was our little insight into how much the Lord appreciates when we are discussing these topics, that we'd actually put off his rest a little bit. This, of course, not our speculation, but from what the Pujari had said, that he would delay even his rest for the afternoon to hear even our little discussions. So that was a very nice experience.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Are there any other comments or questions? If there are none, do we have time for Sankirtan, Prabhu? Or
Yes, Mataji, we have time. We have time. Thank you so much.
okay, so we're going to sing Jai Radha Madhava, folk more thoughts of the holy Dham. Jai Radha Madhava, Jaya Kunjati Hari, Jaya Radha Madhava, Jaya Hari Bol, Nitya Gaura Hari Bol. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev, Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Shri Shri Radha Madhava ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki jai, Shri Shri Vrindavan Madhudam ki jai, Shri Shri Navadvip Mayapurdam ki jai, Shri Shri Gaura ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Gurudev ki jai, Shri Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Shri Shri Thakur. So thank you all so much again for your kind attention, joining us this week, and please join us again this week for the continuation of this chapter of what Chaitanya was teaching us. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Maji, thank you so much.
Hare Krishna, thank you everybody.